Kirby's made a hire on the offensive line, and it's a name you already know if you've been around for a little bit. Stacy Searles, whose offensive lines were the ones that Mark Richt and company used from 2007 to 2010. Stacy's going to be back at Georgia, and I've gotten a lot of feedback from people about this. Generally speaking, I think to me, it's a good hire as it relates to on the field coaching. Stacy did a really good job, and when you think about it, with guys like you know, uh, Clint Bowling immediately comes to mind. Trent Sturdivant, Ben Jones. They had some guys that were really developed. I mean, over that period of time. That's sort of the heyday of my time covering Georgia. Um, but I think the concern, if you want to call it that, is the recruiting side of thing, and I'm not really sure how much of a concern it is when you consider Georgia's prowess on the recruiting trail. Um, I don't know. I mean, having talked with some older players who played for Stacy, they really like the hire. I mean, they think it's a good hire. They think, but now these guys are all either been recruited by Stacy or played for Stacy while he was at Georgia. And the time that Stacy was at Georgia too, I think the general consensus was this guy is a good coach. Now, it went from Stacy to Will Friend. After Will Friend, it really fell off with Rob Sale, I think was his name. He's at Florida now. And then you had the addition of Sam Pittman, who was very good, and Matt Luke. So I would argue with the one, with the exception of the 1 year blip, you've had some really good coaching on the offensive line. I think the concern side of things is, can Georgia sign high level players without someone who's considered a great recruiter? I don't know. Maybe that's being too harsh. I don't know, but we'll be able to tell pretty quick how well Stacey Searles can recruit, um, because it's always recruiting. Speaking of which, you don't win national championships without recruiting. Make sure you're checking out DAWGSTRUCTION down below while I have your attention. It's an 80-page coffee table book. You're going to want to make sure that you get it. Some of these images are great. That we had from the season. Perhaps none. This is one of the better ones. The pivotal moment where Keely Ringo takes the ball back for a touchdown. But Stacy won a national. So the criticism here, if you want to call it that, the concern is about the recruiting. But Stacy Searles won a national championship as the offensive line coach at LSU under Nick Saban. Now, Nick gets a lot of credit for a lot of different stuff, but I mean, someone who's offensive line coach I mean, Nick doesn't goof around at that spot. That's it. Everybody knows how important that position is on in a program. I mean, 15 to 18 players in your program are going to be offensive linemen. So the offensive line coach has I mean, it's one of the most challenging positions to teach, because what you're doing as a center is not necessarily what you're doing as a tackle. I mean, obviously, you're not snapping the ball at tackle. So it's going to be curious to see. And that's the one thing I think with Stacy. I mean, again, the line of guys that were not very highly recruited or heralded or whatever, they went to the league. I mean, he did a really good job of developing talent. And by the way, this is one of the most gifted offensive lines Georgia's had in a while. Um, this past season's was pretty good too. But this coming year, you got the return of Tate Ratledge, you've got the emergence of Marius Mims, you've got the emergence of Broderick Jones. A lot of the recruiting that we've seen over the last few years from Sam Pittman and Matt Luke, et cetera, it's all going to be there, and Georgia's going to have the ability to really play bully ball again. Now, that might not be the style that Georgia will play. You got to remember that when Stacy's style and Matt Luke's style is not necessarily the same style as Sam Pittman's mash ball. Excuse me. If you can mash people, boy, you do that every single time. It's just like playing man and man-to-man defense in college basketball. If you can play man all the time, you only would play man because you can shut people down. It's easier said than done, though, when the other guys have players. So it might not be mash ball or bully ball the entire time. You have to have a little bit of wiggle about yourself. And that's what those offenses did, the offensive lines under Mark. in 7, 8, and beyond, where they were creating angles and leverage and all this stuff. They weren't just going straight forward. And we've seen against South Carolina in 19, against, I mean, when you play Alabama, generally speaking, it's hard to match them. You got to have a little bit of diversity about yourself as the way you attack as an offensive line. So listen, I don't know. I'm not trying to, I'm not just saying this. I don't know if there's a better fit in terms of just straight up coaching. I mean, Stacy, if you look at his time, he has coached for these, he has been the offensive line coach for these coaches: Nick Saban, Mac Brown, Mark Richt, Kirby Smart. That's not a bunch of losers. That's a lot of national championships. That's There's only two other coaches in college football that have national championships. That's Dabo and Jimbo. Jimbo worked with Stacy at LSU in 2004. So in 2003 as well, I guess it was, when Jimbo was down there. I can't keep up with the LSU to Georgia pipeline, but it's a very real thing with Muschamp and Kirby and Jimbo, and it's a whole deal. But I think he's a really good tactician, teacher, etc. I mean, keep in mind, remember what they were working with in 2007. Okay, when you had a lot of moving parts there, quick. You had Trent Sturdivant at left tackle. I think Clint was left guard, Clint Bowling. I can't recall exactly. Chris Davis was on the list. Chris Davis wasn't ever playing in the NFL. Chris, you were never playing in the NFL. I was going to play in the NFL with Chris, right? That just wasn't going to happen. That team really was effective. And yeah, No Sean was on that team. Thomas was on that team. They had good backs. Georgia's got good backs now too. Generally speaking, right, what I'm trying to say is, I think as this is a really good hire in terms of a person who can teach the position. I, I don't know everything about college football. I don't know if I even know a lot about college football, but I do know that, the group that Kirby was looking at, Stacy is the most, I would say, is the most veteran qualified person in terms of teaching those positions. And, I think Will Friend has got still time to go in his career to where he can get to the point where people will talk about him the way that they talk about Stacy. And the coach at Baylor, I think, was a very serious candidate. It looked like it was headed there, but you can't ever know. So lately, we've seen that a lot of the coaches from Mark's time have come back to Georgia in some capacity. What does that say? What does that mean? Those are some pretty good Georgia teams in 2007 and 8. I mean, let's not act like they weren't good. They were. They just ran into a buzzsaw with Alabama one night, and Florida the same way. So in 8, I mean, they beat Florida's brains in 7. The other thing about Stacy, he's gonna get in your face now. I mean, if you got to do what you're supposed to do. There was more than a couple of times that you'd walk by the offensive line and he would put his fist through the dry erase board. I mean, the first time I saw that, I was like, what happened to his hand? And then, I looked at the dry erase board and I was like, oh, that's why they got a couple of them. Now, I don't know if he still does that or not, but I think this is a really good hire for on the field. In terms of recruiting, I'm just being straight up. I don't know. I don't know. I think Stacy was a good recruiter. John Theus was a well sought after player. This is a guy that was a 5-star guy that wound up playing as a 4 years as a starter at Georgia. Stacy recruited him. That's one example. But there was, the recruiting was not through the roof at Georgia at the time on the offensive line, and I think that's the criticism and concern. But you balance that out with, this guy has developed people consistently, and has won a national championship as this position coach. I don't know. It's something to talk about for sure. While you're thinking about it, check out the link below for DAWGSTRUCTION. We really want y'all to want to get that into your hands. Can't do that if you don't buy it first. We'll see you over on the website. Thanks for watching.